Hey, hi all. So this is the health system partner discussion that we are having. I hope you guys have had a good productive day so far. I certainly have enjoyed some of the one-on-one meetings and the panels that I've got to attend, and hopefully this will be a useful conversation for you as well. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mayank Kaneja. I'm one of the directors at OSF Ventures. OSF Healthcare is a provider organization based out of Illinois. We have 13 hospitals and have about 21,000 employees. In 2015, we began our venture investing work. We announced a $75 million balance sheet allocation to invest into startups across medical devices, health IT, and tech-enabled services. We have 16 portfolio companies now and coming at a Series A, Series B stage. Earlier this year, we announced our second fund, another $75 million dedicated to invest into similar areas. So a total of 150 assets under management. And again, very much interested in looking at technology from a strategic perspective as to how they could return value to the system and how can we provide value to the companies. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists here, starting with Richard, maybe. If you can go ahead and start the introductions.
Sure, happy to. Good afternoon. Rich Mulry, Northwell Health. Northwell is the largest health system in New York with 23 hospitals, about 70,000 employees. We've organized the venture team under an umbrella of a for-profit holding company. The intent of the company is to drive margin for the system that allows it to continue to meet its mission. Within the venture portfolio, which is about 4 years old, we have 15 portfolio companies, about $32 million invested to date across the number of the same areas. We typically serve as a strategic. We usually don't take a lead. Our average investment can vary. We've gone in from just $250,000 to starting at $4 million. We like to look at ourselves as the partner in terms of doing a proof of concept, and before we can start to move the company forward. The other components, though, that complement, I think, the venture arm, look at joint venture. That includes possibly looking at startups, taking some other companies within the portfolio and looking for synergy. We have a huge, what we'll call an ecosystem of innovation, but we have, within the health system itself, we are curating and cultivating our own medical device. We do that in conjunction with a company that's based in Ireland called i360. We also have our own internal Shark Tank, and we have 7 active projects that are on the way of launching to market. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cyril Phillip. I'm a principal at Providence Ventures. Before the intro, I just want to thank the Resi team for putting together this panel. Always a pleasure to come out to Boston from Seattle, where I'm based, so I'm happy to be here. So Providence Ventures, we're the venture capital fund for Providence St. Joseph Health, a large West Coast health system, one of the largest health systems in the U.S. We have over 50 hospitals across 7 states, over 500 outpatient facilities, a health plan that covers over 1 million lives, ACO coverage over 1 million lives, and so from an investment perspective, that enables us as a venture fund for this organization to look at investments from a multitude of different angles, so either payer, provider, or even outpatient. The fund itself, we manage $300 million of capital and are investing out of our second $150 million fund. Typically look to put anywhere from $5 to $10 million initially in companies, and then reserve up to $15 million per portfolio company over the life of an investment. The fund itself is part of a much broader digital organization at Providence, and the whole organization is focused around innovation. So there's a lot of moving parts in our organization, including a digital strategy team that's dedicated to finding out problem statements within our system, a group of software developers who are building products and solutions for our health system and to eventually spin out for our health system, as well as the digital marketing team helping to modernize our websites. And so Providence's digital strategy has been in the works for around 6 years now, and so it's got to mature and grown as the organization has grown. In terms of portfolio companies, we've invested in 18 companies to date. And one of our key points in terms of value add is that we work with all 18 companies that we've invested in, and that's kind of something that we want to continue with every investment that we look to make. In terms of the investment criteria, we have both kind of the traditional finance criteria, like around returns, valuation, et cetera, as well as a strategic component to how we invest. I think I'll pass it over.
Great, thanks. So I'm Eric Liam. I'm the Executive Vice President for Innovation Partners at Mount Sinai, the Mount Sinai Health System in New York City, one of the largest providers of healthcare in the greater New York City metropolitan area. We have approximately 40,000 employees, 8 hospitals, dozens of outpatient facilities, and we have facilities actually in 5 states now. In regard to our innovation activities, Innovation Partners represents the institution, both the clinical enterprise as well as our academic enterprise, which includes a top 20 medical school, graduate school, and a growing nursing school. And we do about $450 million a year in basic research and applied research. In regard to our investment strategies, we represent both internally the institution as well as look at strategic opportunities externally. In order for us to make an investment, we do need to have an internal clinical champion that believes that the product of an external company would be, again, strategically valuable to us or to our patients. In terms of the vehicles that we use, we have just under an $11 million accelerator fund that we use for the development of commercially relevant intellectual property that we're then able to spin out. We can do partnerships or joint ventures with other entities when we think that the product would be strategically valuable and there might be an opportunity for joint studies. We also have Mount Sinai Ambulatory Ventures, which invests directly off the balance sheet, both in clinical care facilities as well as an innovation portfolio, and we have approximately 6 investments currently and have just started really the innovation investing about 18 months ago. In regard to our accelerator, we have about 7 programs in acceleration right now that we believe will be the basis for new companies in the next couple of years. In terms of the overall portfolio, a very large portfolio of technologies internally that we're advancing and coaching to move out of an institution in the next few years.
Great, great. Hopefully that gives you guys a good flavor of how we may be similar but are also unique in our own ways. All of us have some dedicated areas, maybe it's venture investing and innovation, but we also have some uniqueness to our programs where like a healthcare system like OSF doesn't do joint ventures, but Northwell does, and we do not have a tech transfer office, but maybe Mount Sinai does. So there's a full spectrum of healthcare system partners that you're looking at here. Richard, one of the questions that we get from the entrepreneur community here is, how closely do you work with your clinical or business leaders, and how does that impact your decision making? And what is that process, if you can elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So we have so many sources of deal flow, but once something comes to our attention to look at, just like my colleagues here, we always will have a subject matter expert and a champion internally within Northwell that advocates for it, that will look at the idea, look at the criteria. Is it meeting an unmet need? What are the barriers to entry for this, so that there's a lot of competition in the space? What's our likelihood of success if we were to look at this and start to investing down that path together? Once they pass that threshold, we would then just take it through a normal process of due diligence, normally from a finance perspective. Interestingly enough, when we grow things from within, we already have that portion done because the people that are actually in the trenches have created these solutions. So we have an internal way to calibrate too against what's also going on in the market at the same time. So we're happy to look at it from both perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that what my colleagues here their comments align very well for us at Mount Sinai as well. Again, when we're looking at an external technology or an external opportunity with a company, it really has to be something that is going to be strategically valuable to us. The other thing that I would say is it's always very important to understand what the clinical enterprise, the academic enterprise is going to need, and also what it's doing in terms of developing its own solutions. So if, for us, I should have said earlier that from a portfolio perspective, we look at technologies that can be foundational for drugs, devices, diagnostics, digital health, as well as research platforms and tools. Now, in particular, we were approached on a routine basis for digital health solutions, and Mount Sinai as a system, because we've gone through substantive acquisitions over the last few years, is rolling out Epic broadly across all of our entire clinical enterprise. And so when you look at solutions from a digital health perspective, particularly operational, oftentimes we're not at a stage where we're ready to look at something other than what we're doing right now in terms of our electronic medical record systems, in terms of standardizing. So in terms of solutions like patient scheduling and what have you, those are a little more challenging. But again, we obviously would also need to have a clinical champion.
And so one thing I'll just add that I think all of us here do is just, so for Providence Ventures, a lot of our work is around connecting with the internal leaders around what their needs are. And so for me especially, I connect with our HR leadership around talent management type solutions, around what their pain points are. And then I use that when I'm out at conferences such as this one or other ones to find solutions that meet those needs. And so it's not only during investment processes that we're involving the operational colleagues that we have or the clinical colleagues that we have. We look at them as true partners in helping identify areas that we should be looking for from an investment perspective.
Yeah, and I would totally echo that what Cyril said. I mean, we at OSF, we've written checks before we've actually used the product. So like on the med device side, sometimes it's hard to actually see the whole device working before it actually has gone into commercialization phase. So if we have a clinical champion who supports that concept and believes in the outcomes, what the company is proposing, we are okay to write a check before we actually have used the device. On the digital health side, we obviously have the opportunity to test that technology, and sometimes, again, like leveraging the data that we've collected helps us making that decision faster, I would say. We all have been approached by entrepreneurs, the startup community in multiple ways and multiple times. So tips, certain tips that you think would be helpful for the community here as to how they should approach a system like Northwell or Providence or Mount Sinai. Like historically speaking, if you look at your portfolio companies today, how have those successful relationships or partnerships developed or forged?
So I'll chime in first and have the rest of the panelists jump in. So one of the tips I give out to entrepreneurs is, for a larger health system like Providence, and then most of the health systems here, a lot of times CEOs, I ask them who within our system would this resonate with, or who would this be most receptive to? And usually sometimes the answer I get is, well, the CEO or CFO. But unfortunately for us at larger health systems, we may not necessarily be able to send every company that we see to our CEO. So I think one piece of advice I always give out is just make sure you have targets within a health system that you specifically look at as potential operational partners. So for example, somebody in the the clinical organization that addresses or covers kind of the area you're looking at, you can look through LinkedIn to find the right contacts. I think that helps me out, especially in terms of making sure I bring your company to the right person within Providence.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, since my organization really represents the entire spectrum of healthcare, clinical care, all the way through academics at Mount Sinai, it really depends on what it is you want to accomplish. So, for example, if you would like to partner with Mount Sinai to do a clinical trial proof of concept on whether it be digital health or any other kind of technology that your company has, you can come to us and we'll actually help find an appropriate investigator and pair you up. We do quite a bit of that work. You can also oftentimes go directly to different meetings and meet the investigators and partner with them directly, because having, again, a clinical partner or champion is really important. So on the research side, there's various avenues that you can get to us, and if you do get to Innovation Partners, we will make sure that we connect you with someone in our enterprise that could potentially be interested in working with the company. If it's more of an opportunity where you've got a product and you want to sell into us, we're still going to, exactly as Cyril was saying, we're going to have to find who is the right entity within Mount Sinai that's going to be the champion. Is it population health? Is it our digital group? Is it ClinOps? What is it? The other thing I would say is that the product has to meet a significant unmet need in the marketplace. And there has to be, in a clinical enterprise, there has to be significant revenue in some way associated with us adopting a product. One of the biggest challenges right now, I think, in the United States, as we're going from pay for service to value-based care, is the idea of savings. I've got a product that I can save you, but it's only going to cost you this many millions to implement it. Those are difficult conversations to have unless the savings is in a field that is absolutely clearly an area that we actually would benefit from. If it's a disease area where there's a lot of members of our accountable care organization or what have you, where we're under a value-based reimbursement scheme, then that might be of interest. But there has to be the appropriate balance there in terms of ultimately cost versus revenue and adoption.
I'd echo those statements as well. When we look at it in terms of an investment opportunity, sometimes if a company is far enough along, we can direct them just down the procurement route, so they can go right into our supply chain and we can endorse them as a user of their product, not necessarily as an investor. And it's a good way not to have to say no, but maybe help advance what we think is a good idea. We would have the clinical trial route, obviously, and then we have the pilot. So the question for us, in addition to the other comments, is when we looked at piloting, we would bring a multidisciplinary group together. Sometimes our digital experience team, the OCIO seems to be in almost every meeting that we have now in terms of looking at our solutions. But if we were to pilot this and just say it was to be successful, where do we see it fitting in on an enterprise-wide scale? So could we deploy this throughout the enterprise? Is it worth the time and effort to make sure that this solution then would bring value back to the organization? We think through that process. If it did for us, perhaps then it's an endorsement to the market that they could do that. And if we have no interest at all, sometimes we will just refer it to some other sources that we think would be successful.
Yeah. No, I mean, some of the perceptions I think the entrepreneurial community has is that we as healthcare system venture partners do not have as much of a deal flow as the traditional VCs get. But again, I think we are, in general, looking at 400 to 500 deals a year, like most institutional funds, and making 5 investments on an average every year. So I think there are a lot of no's to be said, but I think it doesn't mean that it is discouraging. We look at those and reevaluate those companies every year. And I think although you might see a lot of no's coming out of our programs, but I think there are some great success stories as well. So those would be my 2 cents on top of what Cyril, Eric, and Rick said. So Providence, Cyril, has been around for 5+ years now, the ventures team in particular. When you look at sourcing methods and techniques that you've been using and the current portfolio that you have, what would be your advice to the entrepreneurs here as to what is their good use of the tech when it comes to forming relationships? How do you go and source deals, and maybe description of your sourcing today, and how do you get good quality deals?
Yeah, and so I'll flip that question a little bit in terms of what the ideal sourcing would be for me in terms of from a company position. So when a company comes up to try to meet with me or set up a meeting, the ideal situation would be they've already talked to someone within Providence through some sort of sales channel and gotten some some sort of traction there. Because again, like every investment that we make, we need to make sure that it's something that operationally or clinically speaking is needed and is something that you can find a champion for. So I think, when you're approaching like a fund like Providence Ventures, where we're really ingrained with our operational and clinical leadership, the more touch points you have in existence within our system makes it easier, from a sourcing perspective. And I think from that angle as well, for sourcing as well, when we go out, we try to find companies which meet the needs of those groups. So hopefully, if I'm reaching out to you, it's because it's identified as a need. I think that's something to keep in mind as well. I'll pass it over to others to chime in.
It's not dissimilar in terms of we get, I don't want to use the word bombarded, but we have a healthy amount of inflow, intake in terms of the deals coming. When we get them often, I'm just being very frank about email, it's very hard to kind of absorb and go through them, and everything looks rather generic. Nothing really grabs you as something that may or may not fit your portfolio on a given day. But we rely heavily on our faculty. They're out there often looking at other products and solutions when they're traveling, doing either teaching, speaking, or visiting other sites or other conferences. And then we have a series, we travel ourselves, and that gives us a healthy amount of opportunity to think about things. We're also looking for synergy. We have an existing portfolio and we have internal innovation. Many times what we're doing on the inside it needs a partner. It needs some type of solution. It won't be standalone. So if we see that in the market and we think it can enhance the product offering, that's where we start to flip from, say, just straight joint investment to possibly joint venture. Do we want to form a combined entity with the company? It's just something that we've occasionally started to explore and offer. So it's a new way to advance the interests of both and maybe bring them to market faster, sooner, and let them scale faster.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I mean, we all are going to conferences, attending conferences like JPM, like HIMSS, like Health coming up, Resi, I think, but it's not that transactional approach that we take. It's a longitudinal relationship that you're forming with the potential investors, and I think you will not get a check out of a conference, but you might after a period of time working with that group. So that would be my 2 cents adding to what all here said. One thing that I do get on the digital side at least is, okay, we're not raising money right now, but can you introduce us to so-and-so? Like at least you're on the venture team, I realize that, but can you introduce me to X, Y, and Z on a different group? I don't know how you guys deal with it. It'll be interesting to hear stories from you, like because we get so many inflows and inbounds, so dealing with that stuff is hard sometimes. So anybody want to comment on that? Do you make all those connections and introductions? And
I'm happy to start dialogue. So yeah, I get a lot of those requests as well, and for the most part, it's difficult for us on the venture side. When we introduce companies, it obviously comes with kind of the look that, okay, we're looking from an investment perspective, and so from our perspective, I'm happy to introduce when appropriate, but many times it doesn't work well in the company's favor. It tends to be better if you work with that organization yourself through your own sales channels and build support at either a lower level or some sort of level, and then you come back to me and say, hey, this has been working for X doctor or X facility at Providence. Is there anyone else within the organization that this would make sense, or maybe like a regional manager or a CMO type level person, and that way it could be more helpful, because just introducing it as the first time into a system via the venture fund, I mean, it does work. It's not completely out of the blue, but I'd say it's better if you get that support from the operational or clinical side.
Yeah, I would agree, and we have made introductions in the past. It's not common, but The 2 or 3 occasions that when we have, it's either, when we look at the organization and just the amount of change that has to go on and the amount of investment in time and resources, not dollars. When we pilot these solutions and we start to take them through a process of development, the resource consumption is very much at the forefront of our thinking. So either whether it's IT related or just within our clinical enterprise. So if we just don't have the capacity, but we know that this is a really great idea and we don't want to hold up your time to go to market, had you come to us 6 months ago, maybe we could have entertained it. We've had in the past, but I would echo what Cyril said. It's sometimes better to try to find those other avenues and organically grow those relationships.
Okay.
I don't really have anything more to add. I think that, again, for us to start doing due diligence, to make an introduction, if it's something where it's obvious that it would fit within somebody's portfolio, that I know, I'm happy to try to be helpful. But again, we're so inundated with opportunities internally as well as what's coming in, kind of coming over the transom, that it's pretty difficult to actually do a lot of that in the appropriate way.
No, I agree.
One thing I was going to also add is, we're all saying a lot of the same things because, of course, we work the same ways. One of the things that is becoming increasingly important for Mount Sinai, and I should say, Brent Stackhouse runs Mount Sinai Ambulatory Ventures. I sit on Brent's board on the investment committee, and we're increasingly looking at opportunities where there's a consortium or a syndicate of providers that are investing, because then we know that there's more parties at the table, there's more adoption, it speaks to the strength of the product or the company, and I think that's another way to actually work with us is we are talking to one another as well, and in some of those situations where multiple providers actually participate, you can actually get to some pretty decent sized rounds.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you bring that up. So what would be the ideal syndicate that you guys would target? Like what sort of a investor mix are you targeting if you are leading a deal actually? Like I know Providence does that, Northwell has done that in the past, and so what is your ideal syndicate so that the investor group or the entrepreneurial community here can take advantage of that whole investor base?
So I think when we've invested in some of the same companies, I think, over time. When we look at those solutions, we believe that the power of the syndicate obviously is that if they have a certain round that they're trying to raise, they can get there with relatively low risk. They can get there quickly, and then it's usually tied to very distinct developmental milestones in terms of the product development. And so it won't be we understand that it's going to market, and the use of funds is going to be in a very descriptive way. So it often helps to have the endorsement of the other systems in that regard.
So I'll add in a little bit more to that. I agree with Rick's points. I think one thing that for Providence Ventures in particular is the importance of both financial investors and strategic investors as part of a syndicate. Like the way I look at it is you get the best of both worlds if you have that type of a syndicate. Financial investors, I'll give them credit. They're really good at networks. They have good networks of management, good networks of advisors, things that can really help your business grow. Not to say that we up here don't have that as well, but we do. But financial investors, specifically healthcare-focused financial investors, are really valuable to be part of a syndicate. But then the strategic side, what we bring to the table is that, is what Rick said, which is driving home kind of the value prop and getting the buy-in for multiple different parties. And one other thing I'll add before passing it on is just, I get this question a lot is, will you invest with Kaiser on the cap table, or will you invest with another health system like Dignity or something that we compete against? And the answer is yes. I mean, we're co-investors with Kaiser and several companies, with Dignity and a few, and for us, it's a lot more collegial in terms of environment. We're happy to work alongside as many strategics that make sense, because in the end, it's just going to drive value for your entity.
Yeah, I would say to me, I think of a syndicate, but also the overall kind of the body of investors that a company has as a mechanism to de-risk the company, right? So if you've got a syndicate of providers and provider investors that are coming together, that speaks again to the strength of the product, the strength of the company. The strength of the product speaks to the possibility of real revenue and adoption, which is really a function of de-risking the product and the company. But also for us, we're going to look for a strong base of financial investors as well, because we want to see that the company has the support that it's going to need to actually get to the market and actually deliver a product.
Yeah.
If, depending on what stage you're looking at in terms of the company, but risk is a significant component, and syndicates, great investors, strategics, and financial investors speak to actually the issue of de-risking the opportunity.
Yep. No, I 100% agree with what Eric and Cyril and Richard had to say there. I think at every stage there's the importance of family. At a certain stage the angel money is important, but beyond that I think you have to go and look for institutional investors. And like Cyril mentioned, I think traditional VCs bring in a lot of value, and so ideal syndicates for us would be like you have a couple of healthcare strategics and then a traditional VC which has a potential networking arrangement with a potential acquirer of your company. So I think it brings a lot of value if you have those mixes, and we are not averse to it. A lot of people think that healthcare system strategics are just wanting to do a deal within themselves, and so I think the more you see a credible investor, I think the better it is for us. Just talking about your portfolio in general, what would be the number one problem that they are facing, and what is your recommendation usually to those CEOs, to the sales team? And depending on the state, I know it varies a lot, but if you were to identify a couple of problems or the couple of risks that you see most often.
I'm happy to jump in on this one. Again, I'd say it depends on the kind of company, the stage of the company, the type of the product, etc. But one of the things that we see is in the world of digital health, and we're big believers that big data, analytics, digital health, all operation, whether it's more on the care management or digital therapeutics or operations side. These are very, very important solutions that really can revolutionize care and improve outcomes. With that having been said, in the field of digital health in general, I believe it's incredibly important for young companies to have a large clinical partner. I've seen too many companies that are trying, they've been formed, they've got some, whether it's angel funding or what have you, and they're trying to actually break into the clinical world. They're trying to actually identify a customer. They don't have any partners, and I think that's extremely difficult. So the one piece of advice that I would give to companies in the digital health space is find a clinical partner, find a large clinical, integrated clinical provider that will pilot, partner something with you, because it's really critical.
And so I'll add kind of the token challenge that most healthcare startups face, specifically in healthcare IT, digital health, as well as medical devices, which is really around sales cycle. I mean, that's it. It continues to be very long, especially when selling into health systems, and so that continues to be a challenge. But again, it's a manageable challenge, and I think what we've seen in some of our portfolio companies is as they mature and as they get more traction, that sales cycle declines, and so I think it's kind of rough going in the first year, maybe 2 years or so, but then after that, once you start hitting a groove as a company, and we've seen this, it starts getting a lot more easier, and so that's one challenge.
Yeah, I would echo that. And in terms of when we're looking at digital solution, many times when we're piloting, I would say although you have a very distinct developmental roadmap that you want to follow and not deviate too much from sometimes, the product may end up being different because of the way that we're testing and piloting. One where we had use in the clinical space ended up being a workforce investment in terms of investing in exercise solutions for our workforce. So that engagement was 10 times bigger than what we could sell them on the clinical side. So I'd say approaching it also with a sense of flexibility if it seems to not take you off the tracks too much.
Now on the digital health side, I would say like if you are seeing sales cycles of around 8 to 10 months, that's not surprising to us or our portfolio companies. And if you are doing this for the first time, that may take you by surprise, but I think you very will shortly will get accustomed to that sort of sales cycles. As Cyril mentioned, once they start to gain some traction in the market, things start to, the sales cycle do condense a bit. But I think, again, back to Eric's point, having a clinical partner, doing some work with them, having that data, because even on the digital health side, we need some data to see what the ROI was for that institution. And so I think all of what we said, I think, is very important when it comes to sales, and especially on the digital health side. No health system is alike. No two health systems are alike, even though we might sound similar. When you go through our IT security and legal and compliance, it's a nightmare. So I'll leave it at that.
That was the 6 of the 8 months.
That was the 6 of the 8 months.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, when we think about digital health, it would be reasonable for you to kind of say, well, what falls into digital health?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now just generally is a convergence of technologies in all different fields, right? And so for us, when we think of digital health, it's all the things that I mentioned earlier, but also as we think about precision medicine, what is ultimately going to drive precision medicine in the future? It's going to be advanced diagnostics and prognostics. So we really do view that diagnostics and prognostics are rapidly coming into the digital health world, and in many, many cases there's a machine learning or AI component. A lot of data is involved in obviously developing those, and so that's another field that I would say, another category that falls within that as well.
No, that's a great observation. So I want to leave some time for questions from the audience here, but lastly, talking about market trends, are there things that you guys are cautious about when looking at deals right now? Is there any particular aspect on the med device side, the biotech side, or the digital health side that worries you a bit as an investor?
I think our primary concern might just be the speed to market, because there's so much competition and it's changing very rapidly. And many times with the digital solutions, we're looking holistically to try to figure out what's the best integration and platform for those solutions, knowing that something could be coming down the pipe, but we've committed to a certain vision. I think outside of that, it's probably pretty standard.
I would agree with that. I'm just thinking of something that came up this week was, and it actually came in from one of our clinicians. It's a small device for monitoring certain aspects of a patient's health, and the first thing that came up was, well, how many others of these are out there? And it's very difficult at times when you're on the provider side, because there's just so many solutions. And then of course, if you're going to actually spend time on something, really invest effort, do a pilot or something like that, you want to, hopefully choose the one that's going to actually successfully build into a business. And so it can be quite challenging. The competitive landscape is difficult.
Yeah. Now on the digital health side, we are definitely seeing a lot of point solutions, and how do they consolidate? How do they merge? I think is really important, and maybe we'll see that in the next 2 to 3 years. The other thing I would mention, I certainly take valuations pretty seriously. We are a conservative Midwest group, and so valuation is something that we are always worried about. And that ties back to the whole sales cycle thing, when you get to that 2 to 3 million ARR range, and then you're burning a lot of money, and then comes the next round, and then you obviously might be facing a flat or a down round. So just be cognizant of that. That is my 2 cents. Areas of focus for you in the next 24 to 36 months? Anything interesting that you are actually out in the market for, looking proactively for solutions or companies?
We've had a tremendous focus on digital patient experience,
Okay.
and more engaging patients in their own care, but also finding better ways for us to communicate, for ways to monitor their progress through an episode of care, and to identifying where they're at risk, and really trying to help for an intervention.
So one area we're spending a lot of time on is the Medicaid space. And so all things Medicaid with respect to finding better ways to engage those populations, better ways to manage them from a health system perspective, better services to provide. So that's definitely a space that we're spending a lot of time in. I myself am spending a lot of time in kind of the health system learning and development space. So solutions that essentially empower healthcare providers to learn new skills in various modalities, whether that's VR or AR or gamification, et cetera. That's definitely an area that's been identified as a key need, and one that doesn't get as much I guess publicity as kind of the AI or other type areas.
Yeah, I'd say just both of those comments resonate with me as well. I would say for us, just kind of going back to basics of we're really focusing on what is brought in to us through our clinicians, through our champions. But in general, I would say we like digital therapeutics, advanced diagnostics and prognostics, and care pathways. Now, care pathways or solutions around care pathways are a little tricky because one thing that I've found is that when you talk to the clinicians, they'll like, well, we like our care pathways. We don't really want to use anybody else's care pathways. So it's probably more solutions that enable the development of and deployment of care pathways versus necessarily having to adopt somebody else's care pathways that are built already into a solution.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think at OSF we are focused on, like as Richard said, patient experience is one of our key areas to look at. I think we are focusing on provider burnouts. I think that has come out a lot, so we're focusing on solutions around that area. There's the whole digital transformation as to like how do you get to our website and know about the solutions and the services that you have or we have as a system. So I think a lot more consumerism is coming into play with the Amazons and the Googles of the world being there. So with that, I will open it to questions from the audience. I think we have time for about 2-3 questions here. So yes.
Yeah, so in the context of kind of early POCs and pilots, I'm curious if, in the structure of, maybe exchanging data access for preliminary insights, that type of stuff, is that something you guys have a preferred way of structuring those types of partnerships? And are there any suggestions for startups trying to do that or how to take friction out of the process?
In terms of, if it's within the context of testing the solution and it comes as part of the overall program, we would do that. Let's say
really early stage startups, right? A lot of them are looking for a data partner early on to start the engine. I'm curious how you guys do that. Sure.
We're not really engaged right now actively too much in that space.
Yeah, that's not a space that our fund operates in.
It sounds a little bit more like a collaborative research partnership or something like that. We do these things, we're philosophically, what I would say is we look at every deal individually. We adapt to whatever the appropriate situation is, whatever appropriate for that situation. So when we're talking about data, then it's really important to understand, what kind of data, how are you going to get there? Obviously, there's significant privacy issues, legal issues. It takes time to actually get through any kind of certainly any type of an agreement related to data. But we do recognize as an academic medical center that data is critical, and we do enter into relationships that involve appropriate use of data, de-identified data, etc., for advancing development of solutions that we think would be strategically valuable. But again, I want to be careful that there's regulatory frameworks, legal frameworks. There's so many issues you have to go through that, depending on what that relationship looks like, it could easily be, a 9 to 12 month cycle to actually get something done. But this is where I go back to, if you're trying to build a company in, say, advanced diagnostics, prognostics, what have you, you're going to probably have to have a clinical partner, and it probably would start with a large academic medical center in the U.S.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
It sounds like a lot of these ventures are catered to helping the hospital, right? So do you have constant communications of so-called champion from the hospital side so that you know what you look out for as a company, as a partner who want to work with you? How would we find out those leads?
I mean, it's a good question. We're constantly talking, I think that what we've all said is we're constantly talking with various leaders inside of our enterprise about the problems that they're facing, the solutions that they need, and then looking in the broader community at what solutions are out there and what might we want to bring in, and in some cases those are investment opportunities as well. But it's very, I would say, provider specific, depending on the stage that provider happens to be in terms of the various activities. Are they acquiring additional practices or hospitals? Are they stable at this point? Like in our case, are we in the middle? Is the provider in the middle of a large information technology, EHR deployment? So each one's going to be a little different. You're going to have to actually find someone within the provider that can actually help you get that insight. But that's where I think you can plug into our kinds of organizations, and that's part of what we do.
Does it answer your question, or?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
It seems like, given the fact that you're closest to, I'm just starting with a clinical aspect here, to knowing what the unmet need is, you're also in a good position to, instead of passively looking for investments, seeking some kind of, through solicitations or something. Here we have a problem, and tell the community about it, and the entrepreneurs can come and provide. Is there any kind of outreach like that? Or I know from the therapeutics point of view, there are a lot of places that set up screening centers and stuff like that, but closer to the clinic, to the actual bedside.
Yeah, so on Providence Ventures side, we do pretty proactive outreach to companies that fit those needs. For example, in the Medicaid space, we reached out to, I think, probably over 60 companies in that space just through our own research. And so that's kind of the way we do it. We also publish a blog that highlights some of the investment thesis areas, which Medicaid is one of them. And ideally also when we're out and we're talking with our operational leaders, we kind of get a list of areas from them and then just go out and target. I think that's, for us as VCs, that's it's kind of our bread and butter is to go out and find companies rather than creating a big noise and having companies come to us. We will be able to find them. At least that's how I view it.
Sure, and we can find out from a competitive analysis maybe what else is out there, and then we can do a little bit of outreach, because we'd want to do a review of each one of those solutions. We do one thing that's just a little bit, or you're getting more into the space also if the company is not domestic. We're forming a very strong relationship with international trade boards, so we express those needs to them as well. They typically will give them a process and a threshold. They'll source the companies for us and then bring them to us for our own review too.
I mean, at OSF, we've formed relationships with these incubator and accelerator programs. So we have a partnership with Plug and Play in the Bay Area, with Mass Challenge here in Boston. We have a couple of relationships in the Chicago area. So we get to look at all those batches of companies that are coming in every year, at least 30 to 60 companies that we look at. And some of them fit our portfolio, some do not. So I think we do not do I would say a formal outreach, but we are monitoring those startups. So any other last questions before we cut it off here? Okay, thank you so much. I think thanks for being here.